The history of the tank has seen its concept evolve significantly over the past century, from being designed as vehicles that could help infantry cross no man's land on the battlefields of World War I to being some of the most vital units in modern armies. While the technological developments which led to the first tanks began many years prior to the First World War, it is most widely known that the tank first made its appearance in 1916 with the British deployment of the Mark I. Of course, these vehicles were significant advances in terms of military machinery. They allowed for easier crossing of both trenches and open field, which would have bogged down troops and resulted in heavy casualties. The success of the tank would lead to designs that would leave a lasting influence on the entirety of tank design for the next century, notably the implementation of a fully rotating turret. However, while tanks such as the FT-17 and Mark I through 8 have had a lasting legacy, there remains one vehicle from World War I that has largely been left in the forgotten pages of history, the A-7V. To kick off this month of World War I content, I have to give a huge thanks to this video's sponsor, Supremacy 1914. Obviously, if you clicked on this video, you must have at least some interest in World War I, and if that's the case for you, then this might just be a game for you. Supremacy 1914 is a free online PvP strategy game that allows you to take command of a real country from the First World War. Once you choose your nation, it's up to you to produce and manage your forces, including cavalry and infantry, as well as brand new technology like tanks and aircraft. Carefully choose whether to ally or attack your neighbors to be victorious against up to 500 other players in real-time strategy. An added benefit is that you can do this both at home and on the go with seamless cross-platform, so no matter where life takes you, the battle can still be in your control. Check out the link in my description to try the game completely free and get a special bonus of 15,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription just for being one of my viewers. Keep in mind this is only available for 30 days, so don't wait. Now let's learn about one of the vehicles prowling the front lines of the Great War. Ever since the battlefields of the Western Front had become vast areas where armies of both sides could not advance further than a few kilometers at most, both sides equally sought to find new ways of breaking these stalemates. Some of these included massive tunnels dug beneath enemy trenches or mad dashes across open ground in the hopes of reaching the enemy's trench. Although limited success was seen with both those methods, they were extremely costly and often made no real progress. With the invention of the internal combustion engine, though, some new opportunities had begun to surface. The idea of using an armored vehicle to transport weapons and troops through the battlefield was nothing new, as it had been an idea propagated throughout Europe for decades prior to the war. The only true armored vehicles that had been available at this time would be either trains or armored cars, with both having their limitations. For trains, they were relegated to train tracks that may not be available during a battle, and for armored cars, they could not cross trenches or handle mud very well. Nearly every European nation had invested in armored cars, but they had not been a prominent unit in their armies before the war. Interestingly enough, the armored car had seen more interest from Russia and Austria-Hungary than Germany, Britain, or France. For the Germans, they ordered about 5 models of armored cars throughout the war with varying numbers. The nature of these low numbers of armored vehicles comes from the overall disinterest in armored projects from the German High Command, who shared similar sentiments to their Austro-Hungarian counterparts when presented with the highly advanced design of Günther Bürsten's Motorgeschütz in 1911. They were unnecessary. This is where the Mark I and its introduction in 1916 comes into play, as it finally influenced German commanders that armored vehicles were the future of warfare. While they had been undertaking design projects for tracked vehicles, these had not been successes and had effectively been shelved when the war began in 1914. One vehicle that had seen orders made was the Bremerwagen in 1916, which was a bizarre boxy design utilizing a quad-track layout. 20 of these were ordered, but the project saw various failures that resulted in it being shelved. The appearance of the British tanks in September had a profound effect on the German High Command, as in October the OHL, Supreme Army Command, had convened a conference with various members of the automotive production community to develop designs for their own tanks. This conference would eventually become a formal committee in the War Ministry, being designated Allgemeines Kriegsdepartement Abteilung 7 Verkehrswesen, or A7V, standing for General War Department Section 7 Transportation. There were 10 requirements set for this vehicle. 1. Good cross-country performance on all types of soil. 2. Ability to cross a trench width of 1.5 meters. 3. Ability to climb a 10% grade cross-country and 25% for hard surfaces. 4. A 12 km per hour road speed and a cross-country speed of 6 km an hour. 5. A carrying capacity of 4 tons. 6. A full capacity weight of 30 tons. 7. The vehicle must have forward and rear-firing guns with machine guns on both sides of the vehicle. 8. The forward-facing gun must have at least 500 rounds of ammunition, with the rear-firing gun having 300. Each machine gun must have at least 6,000 rounds of ammo. 9. The vehicle must be able to carry 1 reserve crewman. 10. The engine capacity must be able to produce 80 to 100 horsepower. These requirements apparently did not specify a specific armor profile or thickness desired by the OHL at the time of their request. The development of the tank was delegated to the automotive designer Josef Vollmer, who himself was assisted by a variety of representatives from vehicle manufacturers. At this point of development, the tank did not have its toaster-like appearance that we are familiar with. The committee was not able to decide on a general shape and layout of the vehicle, with the Bremerwagen being one of the designs that had been investigated for potential usage. It was not until November of 1916 that they would get a formal order for the tank, designated as A7V, which was to be a vehicle that was able to be used as both a tank but also have a variant that could be used to move equipment and materials around the battlefield, known as the Überlandwagen. While this kind of request would not seem to be too complicated, this actually presented a very difficult situation for the designers. Because of the requirement for the design to also serve as a transport vehicle, this meant that the designs like the British Mark I would not work, and therefore Vollmer chose to use a traditional tractor design. The comparison to a tractor design was justified due to the fact that several Caterpillar Holt tractors were either seized or purchased in order to study their suspension for usage in the A7V. Ultimately, this form of suspension was chosen for the vehicle, and the overall design was finalized and proposed to the VPK of the OHL. While the suspension had reduced the trench crossing ability of the A7V, it gave it an increase in speed due to it having 2 engines instead of 1. In December 1916, 100 vehicles of the design were ordered, but just 1 month later the order was reduced to 10. In terms of armament, the tank was originally proposed to use the 20mm Becker automatic cannon, which would have fired TUF anti-tank rounds. This weapon is similar to the weapon found in Battlefield 1, which is commonly used on the gunner positions of aircraft and torpedo boats. The Becker was never equipped to the A7V due to problems with the round not being able to penetrate armor and was ineffective with emplacements. Due to this, the tank would proceed forward with being designed with either male or female variants, the males having cannons with the females just having machine guns. The next problem with the armament was what the vehicle would actually be armed with, as many calibers were discussed before ultimately settling on the 57mm Maxim Nordfeld gun. Due to production problems with the Maxim Nordfeld design, tanks would only be able to have 1 gun and forfeit the rear-facing cannon. Following the reduction of the production number, the OHL finally issued their requirement for the armor thickness of the vehicle. They wanted a tank that would be relatively immune to field guns, which was determined by the A7V committee to be 30mm. The only problem with this was that this armor thickness would cause the tank to be extremely heavy, and the suspension and its engines would not be able to handle it. Even with different proposals for a smaller design, the weight would not change, and therefore it was decided to have the bow armor remain at 30mm, the rear with 20mm, but the rest of the tank would only have 15mm of armor. The entire vehicle was about 7.3 meters long, 3.1 meters wide, and almost 3.4 meters tall. As you would expect, this caused the tank to be front and top heavy. Finally, it appeared that the tank was getting somewhere in its path to production, even with its apparent flaws. However, this would change with the capture of a British Mark II in April of 1917. The rhomboid design of the tank had greatly impressed officers who were studying it, who remarked on its ability to give the tank excellent mobility. While the OHL had already approved the design of the A7V and ordered its production, Quartermaster General Erich Ludendorff ordered the design of the similar vehicle in September of 1917. This design would be known as the A7VU, with U standing for Umlaufende Ketten, revolving tracks, noting that the tracks go all around the vehicle. As if designing the A7V had not been difficult enough, now the committee had to design two vehicles at the same time. Because of this, the A7VU would not have a prototype finished until June of 1918. Returning to the normal A7V, it would have its first full prototype ready for demonstration on April 30th, 1917. It was here that the tank would show its problems. The test track created was designed to simulate conditions of battlefields of the Western Front and included muddy areas and several obstacles. It was shown that the tank had trouble with muddy conditions and in one of its turns actually broke the track. A few weeks later, the tank was brought back to show its capabilities against other prototypes available, the Orionwagen and the Trefferswagen, which were completely different designs from the A7V. This test would see similar conditions simulated while also giving the vehicles road tests that would last 19 kilometers. While the A7V proved itself to be vastly superior to the other two designs, these tests also showed various problems with its design. It was reported that the engines were difficult to start up, and once they actually started, they would overheat quickly. The vehicle would also be the first to start the German transmission trend, as the gearboxes easily broke. The tracks were also fragile, and the armor plates did not have satisfactory strength and thickness. It also showed the problem with its suspension choice, as the vehicle only had 40 mm of ground clearance and could barely handle obstacles. As with the entirety of the A7V project, the committee would find themselves running into even more trouble throughout 1917 when the Daimler factory had a lack of materials and labor for the tanks. Eventually, the first production vehicle was finished in September 1917, however, this was one of the aforementioned transport vehicles, the A7V Geländewagen. The first actual tank would be finished a month later in a female configuration and presented to the Kaiser himself a few months after completion. The finalized design of this produced tank was a massive armored box with 8 machine guns, crewed by 18 and powered by 2 4-cylinder water-cooled engines. Its suspension was extended to include 24 bogies with springs, which helped give the crew a better top speed than the British tanks. The female variant would also sometimes feature flamethrowers that would replace 2 machine guns, usually 2 from the side of the vehicle. Besides the A7V female, there were also multiple other variants of the A7V produced. The first was the A7V male, which was the variant that would trade the 2 forward machine guns for the 57mm cannon. This would be the tank that would usually be charged with engaging enemy emplacements and tanks, as its cannon had sufficient velocity to be effective in penetrating armor. As with the British tanks, this cannon would only have a limited traverse due to its nature as a casemate mount. Due to engagements with enemy tanks, the OHL would eventually order all A7Vs to be modified to become the male variant. The aforementioned A7VU was finally produced in June of 1918 and greatly resembled the British tanks that it was designed from. It had 2 sponsons on each side of the vehicle, each armed with one 57mm gun. It had the same engine layout as the A7V, but this time they were able to handle having more armor. The front of the tank had 30mm, while both the sides and rear sported 20mm of armor. While the tank had benefits over the A7V, it also had significant problems that were found when it was tested in 1918. The tank was just too heavy, which caused it to have a dismal speed under 9 km an hour, and the wraparound tracks often caused mud to pack on the roof and eventually caused the tracks to fall off the tank itself. However, the tank had superior obstacle and trench clearing ability over the A7V. In September, over 20 A7VUs were ordered but were never delivered due to the armistice in November. Another variant would be the Überlandwagen, the required variant that led to the problematic design from the very beginning. This was essentially an A7V without its armored shell, being a giant flatbed for usage as either transport or towing of equipment. The controls were still aligned in the center like the tank itself, while the front and back of the vehicle were for storage of material. Less than 20 were produced, but those that were sent to northern France in 1917 were reported to have performed well in their duties. Generally, these vehicles transported food supplies and ammunition to the front lines. On this same chassis, a very unique vehicle would be developed, the A7V Schützengrabenbagger LMG trench excavator. This vehicle was built on one of the original shorter suspensions and would be armed with a giant excavator arm. As it had no armor whatsoever, it was meant to work on trenches behind the front line so that retreating troops would have defensive positions already prepared. When the scoops returned to the vehicle full of dirt, they would dispense it onto 2 conveyor belts that would dispose of the dirt to the sides of the vehicle. Only one of these was built, and it is not known as to what happened to the vehicle after the war. The Überlandwagen would give rise to the final variant of the A7V, the Flakpanzer A7V. This can be said to be the very first self-propelled anti-aircraft vehicle, with 2 vehicles being armed with 2 captured Russian 76.2mm guns at either side of the vehicle, and 1 being armed with a German 77mm cannon. These guns were given assemblies that allowed for them to have excellent elevation angles. Each gun had a 360-degree traverse on its mount and had ammunition racks surrounding the guns. The vehicles had a crew of 10, with 4 arming each of the guns. Only 3 were produced, and it is not known if they ever made it out of the testing phase. As of the end of 1917, the Imperial German Army finally had its first Panzer Army ready for operation. By the 13th of December, the army had 7 Sturmpanzer Abteilungen. These units were assigned 5 tanks each, having 6 officers and 170 enlisted troops overall. This was different than the composition of British units, who had 5 tanks with 6 officers and 53 enlisted troops. 3 of these units were equipped with A7Vs, in which 4 of them would be the female variant and only 1 being the male. In 1918, 5 out of the 8 Abteilungen were assigned captured British Mark IV tanks instead of A7Vs. Many of these vehicles, over 100, were captured at Cambrai in November 1917. The tactics assigned to the tanks were similar to those used by Germany in the Second World War, in that the tanks operated separately from the infantry. In May of 1918, it was explicitly stated in a document that the tanks were to advance independently, with infantry to remain more than 160 yards away from the tank to protect them from incoming fire. The first battle for the A7V was at St. Quentin on the 21st of March 1918. 5 A7Vs were deployed and saw limited action other than a successful deterrence of an attempted British breakthrough. During these operations, it was found that the A7V was very difficult to operate in combat due to the vast amount of crew in the vehicle and the temperatures and gases that would develop inside it. The most significant battle for the A7V was the Second Battle of Villers-Bretonneux as part of the Spring Offensive of 1918. This battle was the first tank-on-tank action in history, pitting British Mark IVs against the A7Vs. Early that morning, British forces were easily surprised and overrun by the tanks, and this allowed for the town to be captured. South of the town was Gruppe Steinhardt with one of its tanks named Nixa encountering 3 British tanks as the fog dissipated at 11 o'clock. These tanks were 2 female and 1 male Mark IV, meaning only one of these was armed with cannons. Nixa was able to easily disable 2 of the British tanks with its 57mm, but was surprised by the Mark IV male and was hit by a shell that killed her gunner and wounded several others. The crew then abandoned the tank due to British shells coming dangerously close to the ammunition storage. When the Mark IV finally left, the crew took back their A7V and drove it back to their lines until it broke down due to an oil leak. While the encounter was a stalemate, it was still significant due to it being the very first engagement between opposing tanks. Later that same day, British Whippets would be defeated by an ambush of 1 A7V and multiple field guns. The A7V would only see limited action for the rest of the war, with some successfully defeating French forces at the Third Battle of Aisne in May, and in July seeing no losses out of 8 fielded at Rheims. Their last actions in the war were in October near the city of Louis. Following the war, many were transported outside of German territories such as Britain, France, and Australia. 2 Überlandwagens were converted to A7V-like vehicles by Fricourt units in 1919. While designs such as the FT-17 and British Mark tanks would see wide success and fame during and after the war, the A7V was marked by consistent problems and complications throughout its development and operation. The German echelons of command waited too long to realize the importance of tank development, and when they did realize, they prepared their tank project for disaster by having an unnecessary requirement for a transport variant. This was only compounded by the changing requirements and the constant interference by the OHL in the design process of the vehicle. Eventually, this produced a formidable vehicle on paper, but in practice a tank hindered by its massive size and suspension. This is not to completely disregard the vehicle though, as the A7V did still see many limited successes in its career in battles. History would not see the A7V have much of a legacy in terms of its design, but rather the way in which the vehicle was used. An officer from the A7V, Alter Fritz, named Ernst Volkheim, would go on to be regarded as one of the most prominent German tank theorists, as his teachings would greatly influence the concepts of blitzkrieg, and has been argued to be the true developer of the tank tactics brought about by Guderian. Overall, the A7V was an example of a tank that was the epitome of too little, too late, due to its limited numbers and capabilities. Only one original A7V still exists, the tank Mephisto, which was captured by Australian forces and sent to Australia after the war. While the A7V did not cement itself into history as an influential design, it will always remain in our minds as the giant toaster from the First World War. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like it and subscribe for more. All month long, I will be posting World War I related videos, so if you liked this one, there's plenty more to come. One final thanks to Supremacy 1914 for sponsoring the video, and a reminder to download it now so you don't miss the free bonus available for the next 30 days. With all that said, I'll see you in the next video.